With Parliament back in Canberra for a sitting fortnight and the Prime Minister overseas, the S23 team is taking the lead with campaign efforts across Australia. Since the referendum date was announced last week, its leaders have hit the ground in battlegrounds in Tasmania and Western Australia. And on Wednesday, S23 Director Dean Parkin and spokesperson Jade Ritchie were here in Darwin joining volunteers for a barbecue and handing out flyers. While the Northern Territory result doesn't count in the referendum requirement for a majority of states, the campaign still needs the votes of Territorians as it tries to win the necessary national majority. I caught up with Jade Ritchie at the event to hear how the campaign is trying to defy the poor polling for the yes vote. Jade Ritchie, back on home turf, selling the voice. What's your message to people here?
The message simply is this. We have to vote on the 14th of October. The vote needs to be yes. What we need to see is an advisory body to government that makes sure that Indigenous people are heard on the matters that affect us. You know, the priority areas that we experience up here in the Northern Territory, as well as everywhere else, housing, education, changes in the justice system. We just need to be heard on the things that affect us, and we need recognition of this beautiful culture that we want to share.
There's a couple of polls out this week, one in Newspoll, another one in The Guardian. Both have the Yes campaign behind. Are you worried that things are tracking in the wrong direction?
There are going to be a lot of polls between now and the 14th of October, and the only one we're concerned with is the one on the 14th of October. What we're focused on is people. And I can tell you, I've been travelling so much lately around the Territory, but also lots of regional trips to Queensland, New South Wales. We hit up South Australia next week. The conversations on the ground are amazing. The campaign's ready for this, and more importantly, Australian people are ready for this change. There's a lot of support. We've got over 30,000 volunteers across Australia out there spreading this message.
Noel Pearson was saying this week about winning over the sort of soft nose, the people who are yet to really make up their mind but are perhaps leaning towards saying no. How do you win those people over?
Well, a conversation that just happened right here before you arrived in Raintree Park in Darwin was a fellow who has been in the public service for a really long time. He knows why we need a voice, but he'd heard a bit of noise. So he just needed to be reassured that this is an advisory committee. The idea is to give government good advice so they can make better, more efficient decisions. He thought he was going to vote no, and after hearing exactly what this is, cutting through the noise, filling these gaps in information with truth, he's on board, and we're just seeing that everywhere we go.
Do you think the fact that there's a lack of detail, that's something the government's been criticised, is that hurting your cause, do you think?
I think the noise around that is hurting our cause. I think that the distractions we've had to cut through. But what I can tell you is, when we go and do these information sessions, there's a 92-word amendment to the Constitution that we're talking about, and it simply says, do we agree that there needs to be a body of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives that can actually make representation to government on things that matter to us. That's once people understand exactly what the question is, then they're on board. There is that level of detail. We've put out the 92 words. We know what we're voting on. The question is out there. So people know, and I think, Australians have been extremely underestimated by the other side. When people are unsure, they're finding out more. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing that at the community events. Our volunteers are at market stalls and train stations, and we're having these conversations all day, every day. So people want to know, and when they find out exactly what it is, which is an advisory committee, and it is constitutional recognition so that we can unite this country and enjoy this beautiful culture that we share, people want that. They want to be part of that, and they want to do it now.
Well, what about questions like how many people will be on The Voice? Where will The Voice be based in Canberra, for instance? Will it be based... where will it be based? Will it be based in Canberra, or will it be based in a regional part of the country? Can you give any clarity around some of those questions?
Yeah, so there are design principles, but what we know, it's a process, so we need to go to the referendum on the 14th of October. We need to vote yes. Right, so the first thing we need to do is make that constitutional amendment, and then we get to the work of putting the body together, and that will be done in the usual way, which is for parliamentarians to work through what the legislation will look like. They will work out what the composition and function will look like. What we do have is design principles. They are available online as well. So, you know, we know some of the things are like there will be gender balance. We know that youth voices will be heard. You know, we know that there won't be veto powers. We know that this will give advice to government and the executive. So, you know, we will be doing this in the usual fashion. The Constitution is this big, so the level of detail on everything does not sit in the Constitution, and most Australians are aware of that now. So if you use the tax example, the Constitution says that government can set taxes. That's what sits in the Constitution. It doesn't say how much tax or who the tax commissioner is going to be or where his office or her office will be. So, you know, Australians understand the difference between the Constitution and legislation, and that's just part of the noise, unfortunately.
How do we make sure the most disadvantaged Aboriginal people who live in this part of the world have their voices heard? The one detailed model I've seen is in the Carmen Langton report. It only has 3 representatives on the national voice from the Northern Territory. Are people right to have concerns that their voices might be drowned out by people in the bigger cities?
So what the Voice is going to do is it's going to capitalise on what's working in regional and remote communities already. So if we use the Northern Territory, for example, local decision making and cultural governance already exists. So we've got intel from the ground that needs to be fed up. At the moment, there's no vehicle, there's no conduit between what we're getting on the ground and the decisions that are made in Canberra. So the Voice will not supersede any of the bodies on the ground that are already working. We've got amazing service providers. What they need is a federal body to be giving advice to Parliament so that the policy, programs, the legislation that underpins what they're trying to do actually aligns and empowers them to do the good work on the ground. So we will still be hearing from remote communities in the way that we hear now through their current organisations, and then that information will go up to the Voice and have that federal relationship there with the Parliament.
And how would you see that helping to address some of the issues we see on the ground here in the Territory? Issues like domestic violence, like poor attendance rates at school, health issues where we see people suffering from conditions that are otherwise only seen in the third world. How is the Voice going to address some of those issues?
Well, quite simply, if we're giving advice on those issues, if we're giving advice from the people who are affected by those issues, government can make better decisions about that. So it's the policy that will underpin the programs that are implemented on the ground. That's where that advice needs to land. You know, so at the moment we see a lot of great things happening on the ground, but to try and get that federal support, there is a disconnect. You know, we talk about that messaging getting diluted down the Stuart Highway. So a national representative body, a Voice, will help to bring that message to Canberra so that policy and legislation is better informed. We know that when communities are heard, they thrive. They do so much better, and when people have that buy-in and can actually have that self-determination, the community functions a lot more soundly.